Okay, in this module we're going to start on the OWASP top 10. So before I go through that, let me explain the OWASP. So OWASP is an organization, it's a nonprofit organization called the Open Web Applications Security Project. Nonprofit, a consortium of companies who are all working together to improve the security of web applications. And back in 2010, they came up with a project to identify what are the critical web application flaws that need to be fixed. They updated that list in 2013, and that's what we're going to be going through now. And I'll say this at the end of one of a future module that currently OWASP is going again back to look at what are the top security flaws now. But what we're going to do in the next 4 modules is go through these top 10 security vulnerabilities. Now, if you don't develop web applications, this is still for you anyway. A lot of these flaws that we're talking about are really with any kind of an application or a project. So keep your ears open. And so each of these, as we go through the top 10, think about these are very common problems. The way OWASP identifies these top 10 is looking at data and data that is submitted by the member companies and anyone who wants to contribute information. So these are the most prevalent, most dangerous security vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities are really at the code level. They're not at the design level. So these are vulnerabilities that you can fix through specific lines of code. The first one that we're going to talk about are injection vulnerabilities. So an injection attack occurs when unvalidated input comes from outside of the system and is embedded into the input stream. Who can do this? Who are the threat agents that can perform this type of attack? Anyone who can send untrusted data into the system, like anyone who can change a URL with, by putting in their own data, anyone who can fill in an input form can perform this type of attack. It's easy to exploit, as you'll see when I show you some examples. This is an easy one. It's text-based attack. Any entry point is a potential mechanism for an injection attack. This is a very common vulnerability, and it is done through any kind of query like SQL query, NoSQL query, LDAP, XML are all candidates, and you'll see some examples in a moment. We often see these types of vulnerabilities in legacy code, but unfortunately, we are generating more and more of these types of vulnerabilities every day, and that's why you need to be listening to this video so you don't generate any more of them. It is a vulnerability that is on the rise, even though the awareness of security is on the rise as well. So we need to stop the trend of injecting these types of vulnerabilities. As far as detectability, detecting these vulnerabilities if they're in the code, it's actually quite easy to detect these vulnerabilities if you're looking at the code. So you can look at it through inspections, you can use a static analysis tool. To some degree, you can use a fuzzing kind of tool that will send bad input into input fields to detect these. But most often it is best to actually look at the code and find them, and efficiently to use a static analysis tool. As just a story, we did a research study a number of years ago, and in the study, we had an application that we were looking at, and we knew, based upon static analysis, that there were more than 500 injection vulnerabilities in that code. So we knew it. But then when we tried to test it in a black box format, the student who was working on that project actually tested the application for 15 or 20 hours, and he actually only detected 5 of those, even though we knew they were there. So if you're trying to find if your system has any of these, my recommendation is that you use a static analysis tool in order to identify the locations of these types of vulnerabilities. The impact of, if there is a vulnerability, can be very severe. Data can be stolen, data can be lost, data can be changed. You're actually giving your attacker a mechanism to ruin your data. Let me give you an example here of under the covers what's going on with an injection attack. Here is a query statement. And in that query statement, it's getting a parameter from the outside. So it's getting this ID field. So an attacker has a mechanism, such as in a login screen, to type in their identifier. And if they type in their identifier, as you see on this screen in red, that their ID is tick mark or 1 equals 1, so they say that's their ID. Then when that query gets processed, this is what it looks like. Select everything from accounts where the customer ID equals empty string or 1 equals 1. And 1 equals 1 is always true. So that means that whole line of code will evaluate to true. So select everything from accounts when the customer ID is true. And that applies to everything. So what would happen at that point is all of the accounts in the account table get sent back to the screen. So you may be trying to use that as a login authentication mechanism. Instead, what you're doing is enabling an attacker to see all of the accounts in the accounts table. You need to be careful about that. So, and here's just an input screen, just a reminder with this input screen that you can type in some kind of a SQL injection attack in every single field here. So where Andy is, where programmer is, every input field that you type is a possibility for an injection attack. But you see some of these pull down screens like North Carolina and Pennsylvania. These are pull down screens. You think, okay, we're safe there. But you're actually not safe, because an attacker can do save as and look at the actual HTML, which is shown here. And once they do that, they can change anything in there. So they can change those pull-down menus, the values of the pull-down menus, and all kinds of things. So the attacker knows easily that they have the ability to monkey around with the HTML. So your actual user interface provides no security from this type of attack. With that, keeping in mind, it's not just the user interface itself, but this is a screenshot of a tool developed by OWASP. It's called Zap. And what the tool can do is, if you put it in place, you type in, so say you're typing your login and password, but you set it up in this Zap tool, this proxy tool, and you type in user ID and password, and it stops the input at that point in this screen, and you can change the data. So even if on your client you have some filters to stop bad input, like or 1 equals 1, and you stop it there, but you can go to this proxy tool and change the data and then send it on to the server. So any kind of protections you have on the client actually don't matter. You need to have all the protections from this type of injection attack on the server side code, because this Zap tool will take away any client-side protection. So keep that in mind. How do we prevent injection? One way that many people do is to use what's called prepared statements, which is an alternative query mechanism to just a plain SQL query. What you have here is an example of a prepared statement that first is being set up. And you can see that there are some parameters in that query: the first name, last name, email address. And what you're doing is then binding these parameters. What you would do within the application is give values to the first name and the last name and the email address. And then after you bind those parameters, you execute the statement. And so what this is really doing is separating the data out from the actual control. And there are types. It does type checking to make sure that the types of the input are what you want it to be. So prepared statements are a way to prevent SQL injection attacks. But there is, OWASP provides a SQL injection cheat sheet with a whole list of ways that you can protect yourself from injection attacks. So I really encourage you to check that out. There are many mechanisms for stopping SQL injection. As I said, awareness is a big part of that, but they just keep happening. And so there's something actually out there called the SQL Injection Hall of Fame, and there's a URL here for you, and that's the picture that's on the webpage. If you look there, you can see companies and who have SQL injection attack, successful attacks, and they're up through 2017. It's up through current times. So if you want to see what kind of companies actually still are victim, so McAfee is a security company. They appear on there a couple times. So no one is immune to these types of injection attacks. There's voting machines, there's universities. Lots of people are still vulnerable to these types of attacks. So it's up to you to close that up. Here's a comic just to finish us off. Here's, hi, your son's school. We're having some computer trouble. Oh dear, did he break something? In a way, did you really mean to name your son Robert Drop Table? Oh yes, little Bobby Tables, we call him. Well, we've lost this data, you know, and I hope you've learned to sanitize your database input, because this type of statement here, the drop tables, that's something that would be along the lines of an injection attack. Injecting a program code into a data field can cause this type of vulnerability, and so this is a comic, but it actually could happen in real life. So it's up to you to close this loop.